Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving deep into one of the most ferocious political dramas in recent American history, and we're doing it through the insider account provided in the book Justice on Trial. I mean, that was a moment of just raw, televised emotion that completely captured a deeply divided nation. Brett Kavanaugh's fiery defense during his confirmation hearing became this unforgettable scene. But as we're about to see, this battle was about so much more than just one judge. So that's the big question, right? How did we get here? According to the book Justice on Trial, to really understand the explosion, you can't just start with Kavanaugh. You've got to rewind and look at the political chessboard, see how the game was being played long before he was even nominated. Right. So this fight didn't just pop up out of nowhere with Brett Kavanaugh. The book frames this as the climax of decades of political evolution, a slow buildup where the Supreme Court basically became the ultimate prize in American politics. Okay, so this timeline really lays out how the stakes just kept getting higher and higher. Each of these events just cranked up the political temperature. After Justice Scalia passed away, things were tense, but the court's balance kind of held. But then, Justice Kennedy, the court's crucial swing vote, announces his retirement. And just like that, the entire ideological balance of the nation's highest court was on the line. It was clear. Everything was about to change. So, as the book tells it, the opposition to Kavanaugh was, well, immediate. And it wasn't random. They were pulling from a playbook that had been polished and perfected over decades of these intense political fights. And a key part of that playbook is a strategy the authors call Borkin. Yeah, it's actually a verb now. It's named after the really contentious and ultimately failed nomination of Robert Bork back in 1987. It was so influential that it literally changed the game. Confirmation fights stopped being just about a judge's qualifications and became all-out wars of public perception. Now, this is absolutely crucial. The book argues that by the time Kavanaugh was nominated, the old rules of the game in the Senate were, well, they were gone. Both parties had pretty much dismantled them. The filibuster, that procedure that let the minority party block a vote, it used to force compromise, but then Democrats got rid of it for lower court nominees in 2013. Then Republicans did the same for Supreme Court nominees in 2017. With those guardrails gone, the stage was set for instant, massive opposition no matter who the nominee was. So after weeks of hearings that were all about, legal documents and judicial philosophy, the whole thing just took this incredibly dramatic and intensely personal turn. Suddenly, the debate wasn't about the courtroom anymore. It was about a high school party from decades ago. And this is how it happened. The book explains how Dr. Christine Blasey Ford's allegation of sexual assault, which she said happened back in high school, first came out in a confidential letter to Senator Dianne Feinstein's office. But then it was leaked to the press. And just like that, a private claim was thrown right into the middle of a massive national spectacle. And this is what set up that classic he said, she said situation that just completely captivated the country. On one side, you had Kavanaugh pointing to his detailed calendars from 1982 as evidence. On the other, you had Dr. Ford recounting her memory of this traumatic event. Now, the book makes the point that from a purely legal standpoint, the case against him was weak because none of the witnesses Ford named, not even her lifelong friend, could back up her story. And this is where the book really digs into what it calls a slanted media narrative. The press went through Kavanaugh's high school yearbook with a fine-tooth comb, right? Interpreting inside jokes in the worst possible way. But the authors argue Dr. Ford's yearbooks, which they say had spreads on partying and drinking, were pretty much left alone by the media. And the book's point is that this wasn't an accident. It's just a feature of these modern political fights, where a nominee's entire past becomes a weapon. And just look at the scale of the procedural opposition. This number is just staggering. 1,287 written questions. Think about that. That's more than every other Supreme Court nominee in history combined. The book presents this as a clear tactic, not to get information, but to just stall, to bury the nomination in a mountain of paperwork. So Kavanaugh saw all this as what he called a calculated and orchestrated political hit. And at that point, he and his supporters decided a quiet, polite defense just wasn't going to cut it. They launched a really powerful counteroffensive. Now, the authors draw a direct line back to the Clarence Thomas hearings in 1991. It's a really interesting parallel. They remind us that back then, when similar last-minute allegations came out, public opinion polls actually showed that people sided with the nominee, Justice Thomas, by a 2-to-1 margin over his accuser, Anita Hill. So you can bet that historical context was on everyone's mind. So Kavanaugh's defense wasn't just, I didn't do it.
No, it was way more than that. It was an all-out, aggressive attack on the political process itself. He called it a circus, a national disgrace. He wasn't just defending his own name. He was basically attacking the legitimacy of the whole thing while it was happening. And the book really hammers home this point about the lack of corroborating evidence. It leans heavily on the analysis from Rachel Mitchell. She was the sex crimes prosecutor the committee hired. And her conclusion was pretty stark. The case was weak because not a single person Dr. Ford named, not even her best friend, could remember the party ever happening.
So after all of it, the explosive hearings, that incredibly raw testimony, the furious political games, it all came down to a final nail-biting vote. And that vote really just mirrored the deep and honestly painful divisions in the country. And in the end, the vote was one of the tightest you'll ever see for a confirmation, 50-48. So Brett Kavanaugh was confirmed to the Supreme Court. But wow, that battle left some serious scars on everyone involved and on the institution itself. So what's the big takeaway here? According to the authors, the sheer ferocity of this fight, it wasn't really about Brett Kavanaugh's character or some jokes in his high school yearbook. No, it was about raw power. It was about who gets to control the Supreme Court. And they argue that the reason for this is that the Supreme Court is now the final word on the country's most heated social and political issues. So the confirmation process, it's not a job interview anymore. It's all-out political war. There's a quote from Justice Scalia in the book that kind of sums it up. If the court starts acting like a legislature, then people are going to treat it like one. And that leaves us with the book's final, really provocative question. If the Supreme Court has that much power over our daily lives, then is this brutal, hyper-partisan confirmation process just some unfortunate side effect? Or is it the inevitable result of our modern political reality?